bir şekilde
Sevgili Zoltan, merhabalar, hoş geldiniz.
Hoş bulduk. İyi günler.
Zoltan çok iyi de Türkçe konuşur. Önce onu Türkçe selamlamak istedim. Warmly welcome to our program. Especially Zoltan visited Bilgisayar University and we listened and he shared his experience with us. I would like to thank again you accepted us and Emrah Işık today he conduct the program.
Welcome, Dr. Egeris. It's great honor to see you as the speaker of the third week of Erasmus Academic Talk that is planned to be organized again in the following years as well. Dear speaker and dear participants, welcome to the third week of the Erasmus Batman University Erasmus Academic Talks of 2023 spring semester. The topic of this week will be a look at the Ukrainian War from Hungary, a very popular topic for understanding the current situation of Europe and the region that we live. But before that, I would like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Zoltan Egeresi is a political analyst and academic, and he is also a faculty member at the University of Public Service at the Center for Strategic and Defense Studies. His academic interests lie on Turkey, Turkish world, and Balkans. He also teaches on geopolitics and international relations. As you see, he speaks Turkish very fluently. In case of any language barrier, you can also ask your questions in Turkish as well. Dr. Egeresi, the stage is yours. Again, we are honored to welcome you and host you here, and we are grateful for your accepting our invitation for this series of talks. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Çok teşekkür ederim hocam. Ben de herkese Türkçe selamlamak istiyorum. Umarım duyuyorsunuz.
Evet.
Teşekkürler. İşte burada olduğumdan çok memnun oldum. Ve elbette bu konu yine çok sevimli tarafından. Çünkü yani Macaristan'ın Ukrayna savaşı çok etkileyici bir olay. İşte biz de gündemde takip ediyoruz. Siz de takip ediyorsunuz. Neyse, fakat ben Erasmus Talk'da olduğumuzdan dolayı İngilizce devam edeceğim. Ama herkese Türkçe selamlamak istedim. Hem de öğrencilere sesleniyorum. Onlar Türkçe'de sormak isterseler sunumdan sonra elbette Türkçe'de sorabilirler. Veya İngilizce tercih ederseniz İngilizce de olur.
It doesn't matter. It's up to you. And I just wanted most of them are our students, and I just wanted them to feel free to ask you whatever they want. So I hope that we will have a very fluent and very fertile, very effective talk. So we can't wait for your talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's continue in English, as it will be more practice for everyone. Okay, when we arranged this topic that Hungarian look concerning the war in Ukraine, we had several options. I mean, I started to think what to talk about exactly, because as a Hungarian researcher, analyst, I have my personal opinion, or based on the Hungarian scientific or academic community dealing with international affairs and the war in Ukraine. Of course, it's a big community. We have different angles and opinions. And also I can talk the general situation of the Hungarian and Ukrainian relations, especially vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine and its consequences concerning Hungary, Central Europe, and so on. So, of course, finally decided to rather talk about the Hungarian perspectives. And of course, I will also declare my personal opinions and so on. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about Hungary, because I know that Hungary is a little bit far from Batman, and I visited Batman, which I really enjoyed last December, especially the GR over there. Hopefully I will have the opportunity to come back or to go back to Batman. You know, Hungary is a small Central European country, okay, comparatively. As far as I know, the Turkish foreign policy believes that Hungary is a kind of medium power in the middle, geographical middle of the European continent, which is good. I mean, it's a small country, around 10 million people. And it means that at the European Union level, yeah, you can argue that it's kind of medium power, but relatively small size of country. We have less than 1,100 square kilometers as territory. But at Central European level, especially if we compare Hungary with the other Balkan countries, it's relatively big one or medium one. Vis-a-vis Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Bulgaria. It has a kind of size approximately the same with Greece in terms of population and territory. However, Hungarians have this perceptions that Hungary rather belongs to Central Europe, which means that Austria, Slovakia, which are also neighbors of Hungary in the west and in the north, and also Poland, Czech Republic. These countries are the, let's say, culturally the main center of gravity, and of course Germany, the main centers of gravity for Hungary concerning its history, culture, religion, as the ultimate majority of the Hungarian population is Christian and more than 50% is Catholic, Roman Catholic, while the others are I mean, I would say atheists, but rather they are Protestants, which means that Calvinists from Switzerland, like many people in Switzerland or northern Germany, some Lutheranians and some small churches also appeared in the country from the United States and so on. We have our own Christian sects as well. So from this point of view, Hungary or Hungarians consider themselves as part of the Western European civilization and culture, even if you look at the history, Hungarians arrived from the east, from the Ural and Central Asian regions, and they were living over there and later on with various Turkic tribes. And the Hungarian language is a distinct one compared to the other European languages, compared to the Slavic languages, German, English, and so on. And Hungarian grammatically is a little bit similar to the Turkish, as we are part of the Ural-Altaic language group, but Hungarians rather belong to the Uralian pillar or the Uralian subgroup of this big group, while Turks are belonging to the, or Turkish is belonging to the Altaic family. But as I speak Turkish, I can argue that the Hungarian grammar is relatively similar to the Turkish one, but the words are different. So these are my introductory ideas, just to clarify the position of Hungary by and large. And it's also important to emphasize that Hungary has become, after the Second World War, as part of the Soviet bloc, and it has become a satellite state. This is really important in order to understand the Hungarian foreign policy today and the Hungarian position towards the Eastern neighbors. And this, let's say, Soviet rule ended in the late 80s, early 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Soviet troops left Hungary, which meant that Hungary, in line with the other Central European countries, found itself in a power vacuum, which meant that finally no Soviet troops, which were not, of course, welcomed by the Hungarian population during the previous decades, but anyway. And the Hungarian political elite decided to go west in every term. It means that the Hungarian elite did everything in order to join the Western club. It did everything in order to become a member of the NATO. And for example, with the support of Turkey, Hungary managed to join the NATO in 1999 in the wake of the war in Kosovo, which was a really important point for the Hungarian security perception, the security itself. So right from this point of view, Hungary and Turkey are in the same military security organization, the most important and strongest one in theirs today. And also Hungary did everything again in order to become the part of the economic integration in the West, the European Union. And finally, after tremendous efforts and reforms, Hungary managed to become part of as a member state of the European Union in 2004. So after handling or joining this, the main organizations of the collective West, let's say that, the Hungarian political elite figured out that, okay, right, the situation is safe, So we are in the right group. Our economic relations are ultimately linked to the Germans and other EU member countries. Even later on, almost every of the Hungarian neighborhood joined the EU, like Romania and Croatia, and we have just only 2 non-EU countries, but they have some kind of perspectives to become part of the EU, like Ukraine and Serbia. The others, they're all part of the European Union. So everything, the Hungarian economy, the trade is rather related to the European Union, and also especially to Germany. So this is the gravity of the gravity point for the Hungarian decision makers from this respect. However, after seeing that, the subsequent government from the left, and especially since 2010, when Viktor Orbán, today on the contemporary prime minister, came to power from the right. So these governments decided to somehow balance or counterbalance this vast economic dominance in Hungary or in the Hungarian economic relations, and they opened the way towards better relation with the geographical east. So the countries being in the to the east from Hungary, like Russia, like Turkey, like Central Asian countries, but also Africa and China and so on. So like now, we also use not just the East, but the South as well. But at the beginning of 2000, the contemporary government labeled this economic and political maneuvers as the so-called Eastern opening, which meant creating stronger diplomatic relations with these Eastern states, opening embassies, giving more scholarship opportunities for students coming from these countries, opening trade posts, or let's say economic just to send increased number of economic attaches to these countries as well, signing any kind of cultural, economic, political agreements with this country. As also Hungary joined as an observer member, probably you have heard about it, to the Organization of Turkic States, and the observer status was given to Hungary in 2018, and since that Hungary is a regular participant of the Turkic Council summits. So it has some kind of political, economic, and also in the Turkish relations some kind of social neo-Turanist sentiments and incentives. And we could see that during this decade, the last decade, this Hungarian government were rather showed more understanding towards the interests or the grievances of these, let's say, Eastern states. And we are like just talking about the geographical position. And the Hungarian government also tried to somehow, in order to boost the political and economic relations, so somehow represent or defend in a limited way, of course, these countries' interest vis-a-vis the European Union, especially the European Union. The NATO is something different, but probably you remember that in 2019, in October, when Turkey launched the new operation against the PYD PKK in northern Syria, there was some kind of decision in the European Union to condemn this this operation, and Hungary vetoed that, the acceptance of a declaration. But finally this declaration was accepted, but by this intervention Hungary could postpone it. And as far as I remember, the Turkish media was rather positive about that towards Hungary. And we can see similar patterns in case of China, and in a limited manner towards Russia as well. So we had this general point of view to balancing between various powers and various blocks in order to gain more prominence and to secure the good political, economic, and cultural relations in case if it exists, which is, I wouldn't say that it's totally new in case of other Central European countries or even Western European countries. Here, the Hungarian point of view is that during the communism, Hungary had more limited options to create strong economic relations, pro-Soviet countries or pro-Soviet Union countries like China and so on. And after the 1990s, and especially after 2004, when Hungary joined the Western Bloc, the new Western Bloc, and the European Union, it's totally natural just to catch up to the Western and other Central European countries' trends and making good political and economic relations with these countries. And it cannot be criticized or accused because other countries, the Netherlands, Spain, the Czech Republic from the Central European region, they also have good relation with, especially economic relations with Russia, or at least they had, with China, with Central Asian countries, with Turkey itself, especially the Netherlands in the past, and so on. So finally, Hungary is doing the same as other countries. We just have some kind of political program for that, well-leveled political program, which is also used for internal or domestic political reasons as well. So this is the main argumentation, the main pattern in the Hungarian foreign policy in counterbalancing and balancing between various powers. Probably it will be in a given way similar to the Turkish stance in international politics. But there is another, I would say, rather pro-Hungarian issue or Hungary-related issue, which means that the Hungarian minority issue. The other important date or event in order to understand today's or contemporary Hungarian mindset and foreign policy is the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Probably you heard about it from your previous studies. So the Austria-Hungary, which occupied a large part of today's Central Europe during the 19th century and until the end of the First World War. So the First World War, it was a multi-ethnical empire, and it covered today Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, the western half of Romania, northern Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina itself. So it was a relatively big empire, the second one after the Russian Empire in the European continent, and so on before the First World War, as we can argue. And this empire, when it was dismembered, the Hungarian part, the Kingdom of Hungary, was partitioned in the Treaty of Trianon. It's really important. It was the Hungarian Treaty of Sèvres, if you want. And despite there was some fight in the Carpathian Basins, because the Hungarian kingdom historically covered today's Slovakia, western half of Romania, which was called Transylvania, or which is called Transylvania, or Erdel in Turkish, northern, that's in the plain area of Serbia, so everything which is northern to Belgrade, because Belgrade was a border city by this time. Almost all of Croatia was also part of this Hungarian kingdom. So Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory, which was a huge loss. It's like really the Treaty of Sèvres, but the only difference is that in the Hungarian context, we couldn't afford to have an Atatürk. That's why there was no successful resistance against the occupation or occupying forces of Romanians, Czechs, and Serbs. Then the Hungarian state lost the war ultimately. That's why the Trianon was forced to be signed to the government, and we got a smaller areas of Hungary as it is today. And the biggest problem was that almost 1/3 of the Hungarians within the Carpathian Basin have become a minority as a new citizens of other countries. And still that almost every third Hungarian is living outside of the country's territory is the main point of, in a given way, in a Hungarian foreign policy, that the Hungarian government has to do something in order to save them or to protect their interests and rights. So for example, during the mid-war period, the Hungarian government was ultimately irredentist to somehow get back these territories, which was really interesting because that day, Turkey was rather a status quo seeker country after the Treaty of Lausanne. but the Hungarian government tried to build good relations, which was finally successful. But Turkey couldn't help in order to change the Hungarian borders. It happened for a short while during the Second World War, when Hungary regained some of its lost territories, but ultimately it was lost again at the end of the Second World War. And Hungarians, great numbers of Hungarians, remained again in minority status in Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Soviet Union, because some part of the former Hungarian Kingdom territories were transferred to the Soviet Union. This is called Kárpátalja in Hungarian, or Zakarpatska region in today Ukraine. And the issue is that during the communist era or the Soviet bloc, no one could argue, no one could open the chapter about the Hungarian minority issues, because it was prohibited in that time. But after the 90s, especially when there was a nationalist upheaval in the Balkans, which happened in form of the war in Yugoslavia against various ethnic groups like Serbs, Bosniaks, Croats, and so on. So there was more increased pressure towards the Hungarian groups also in Romania and Serbia. So this chapter could be opened, and the Hungarian state decided, the Hungarian government, subsequent governments decided to somehow protect or represent in a given way in the diplomatic relations the Hungarian minorities' interests. And even after joining the European Union, it remained on the table, and still it's a very important pillar of the Hungarian foreign policy. So one is being part of the Western world, NATO, EU. The other one is somehow counterbalance and balance between various blocs. And the third one is protect somehow the Hungarian minority rights and their status and whatever. Especially this government, since 2010, demonstrated a great intention or commitment towards this policy. As, for example, in 2010, a new legislation was accepted, which made the option or the permission to give Hungarian citizenship towards to people who had some kind of Hungarian ancestry during the 20th century, and who could, let's say, show or justify that they have this real connection to Hungary, so or someone Hungarian, which meant that lots of people could gain the citizenship. Millions of people in the neighboring countries, in Romania, in Serbia, in a given way, Ukraine as well, where and it's a really tiny population in Slovakia, but because, for example, in Slovakia, dual citizenship is prohibited, but it's not the case in Serbia and Romania. And even as far as I know from the Hungarian embassy, a couple of hundred Turkish citizens could also gain the Hungarian citizenship, because they, in a given way, could justify or show that some of the grandparents or whatever arrived from Hungary during Ataturk era, for example. Later on, they settled here. Of course, they have become Turkish. I mean, the next generation, they married with a Turk, but they had this Hungarian ancestry, and they would like to get this citizenship. And as far as I know, there is no need a real Hungarian language knowledge. It's in practice enough to say some Hungarian words like hi and so on. I would like the citizenship. It's really easy to get from this point of view if you have some kind of evidence that you have Hungarian background. So I just wanted to emphasize that some part of the Hungarian minorities living abroad in the Ukraine have become Hungarian citizens. So everything which happens in Ukraine in a given way is a part of the Hungarian domestic politics. Of course, you can argue that the Hungarian government doesn't have to, it's not forced to internalize every kind of issue in Ukraine or other countries related to the Hungarian population, but it was relatively easy, or it is easy to put on the agenda in case anything happens in these countries. It's almost the same situation like in Germany and Turkish relations. Anything happens with the Turkish diaspora in Germany, it's an internal political issue in Turkey, which is totally normal and respectable. So after 2000, until 2014, when the situation changed in Ukraine, Hungary had a relatively good relation with Ukraine. Of course, there was sometimes quarreling concerning the Hungarians living in Ukraine, but there was no big issue. Even if Ukraine is the biggest country in the Hungarian neighborhood, most of the Hungarian economic relations occur or are linked to European Union member states, and Ukraine is not that well represented in the general Hungarian mindset and the general Hungarian foreign policy, and even if it's a, let's say, important partner, but Slovakia, Romania, Austria, they are much more important, and we are much more linked to these countries in every aspect. And the Hungarian population size in Ukraine is relatively small compared to Ukraine. So in the pre-war period, Ukraine population was around 45 million people, while the size of the Hungarian community was around 150,000 people. You may argue that it's comparatively nothing, it's less than 1 percentage point, but this population is living in the Hungarian border zone, which is in northern eastern Hungary or western Ukraine, in the Zakarpattia region, where in this one oblast or district, it represents more than 10% of the population, so it's around 15%, something like this. So in the local level, it's already measurable, and it's really important in the Hungarian foreign policy to protect every kind of Hungarian minority group in the Carpathian basins and so on. So these were the basic issue what the Hungarian government had to relatively deal before 2014, when the war between Ukraine and Russia, or between Russia and Ukraine, started. And there is also another issue which we have to address: how to read these events which led to 2014 and to 2022, opening the way to this new war. There are several interpretations. You are dealing with international relations. I would rather just summarize this this reading, that after the collapse of the bipolar world, there was probably a really short moment of a unipolar world when the United States could dominate, let's say, in the world politics. Even it's questionable whether it existed or not, or when it is ended or not. But let's say for nowadays, it's ultimately over. And from the Cold War, we got to the position or the situation of multipolar world, then still have a really big hegemony, if you want, but at least a dominant power of the United States, having its Western alliance in form of NATO, for example, which Hungary part of that community, and Turkey as well, while we had this strategic West, or collective West, let's say, and it got new challengers during the last 2-3 decades in form of China, but Russia is again has become a more influential power, not super power, but great power, or at least medium power, but also other countries like Brazil appeared on the international sphere and so on. But still, the collective West is the strongest player in economic terms and especially in military terms. But these new challengers started to gain more prominence. And here it's really important to say that still now these kind of challengers, probably only China is the only one who can in the prospective future claim some kind of international importance or international prominence, but it still is so far from that. And these powers, in the current stage, they are rather focusing on their regions. So in case of Russia, it's the post-Soviet regions, and it's a smaller one compared to the Soviet Union areas, because it lost the Baltic states, for example, who joined the NATO and the EU in 2014 in 2003-2004, but Central Asia, somehow the Southern Caucasus and Ukraine, Belarus were perceived by the Russian elite as part of the Russian world or Russian sphere of influence. And this is what we can during the last years, that Russia or other countries, I mean, great powers, try to behave as the most important power and the kind of ruler of these sphere of influences or regions. And during the 2000s, under Vladimir Putin, and especially due to the increased oil and gas revenues, Russia could regain some of its previous powers, and it was demonstrated by the war in Georgia in 2008, when the Russian forces were able to defeat the Georgian armed forces in a couple of days. And this was a really important turning point, a turning point for everyone, that Russia is back, and it will somehow combat the Western influence or the Western endeavors to decrease its sphere of influences and transfer from one country, from the Russian sphere of influence to the, let's say, Western. And the big issue was Ukraine, because Ukraine was the most populous and most developed country of the post-Soviet world after Russia. And it has a strategic position due to the gas and oil transportation pipelines. And it also had a visible Russian minority, especially in the southern and eastern parts of the country. And that's why Russia were rather trying to always counterbalance the Western endeavors in Ukraine. And after the independence of Ukraine, so the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was always a question that what kind of leader will rule Ukraine, a pro-Russian or a pro-Ukrainian one. And until 2014, for given times, there were pro-Russian or sometimes pro-West Ukrainian presidents or leaders. And of course, these states somehow tried to intervene in the Ukrainian domestic politics, but Ukraine had some kind of strategic autonomy vis-a-vis these power blocks or these powers, and every Ukrainian leadership tried somehow counterbalance or balance these powers, which was rather successful. And it changed in 2013 and 2014 when Russia, having in Ukraine a pro-Russian president, managed to hinder Ukraine join the European Union's free trade agreement. So it wasn't the part about European Union membership, but some kind of further integration to the strategic West, which led to the start of the Euromaidan events, which finally culminated in the fall of the Ukrainian president Yanukovych, who fled to Russia in February 2014, which opened the way towards the Russian intervention to Ukraine, because the elite in Moscow thought that the fall of pro-Russian president will weaken the Russian position in Ukraine and will accelerate Ukraine integration to the West. So they decided, in order to protect the Crimean fleet and the Crimean position, that to conquer and later on annex the Crimean Peninsula, which was, I mean, from a military point of view, a fantastic operation, really fast and without blood, which occurred during a couple of days. And later on, Russia initiated a kind of rebellion in eastern Ukraine, other parts of Ukraine, but just only 2 districts, or these endeavors, just only in 2 districts was successful, in Luhansk and Donetsk. And this kind of intervention, even if it was recognized by Russia during so until 2022, opened the way for a normal war between pro-Russian groups and the Russian army in a secret manner and between Ukrainian army supported by the West, and the Ukrainian elite decided to go west, to join the Western club in every means. Of course, during the last couple of years, so until 2022, not major issues happened. So Ukraine couldn't become part of the NATO. It didn't join the European Union, but lots of cooperation were initiated, and the Ukrainian army started to get NATO standard equipment, NATO training, and so on, which made it more powerful compared to previous times when it was full with Russian spies and let's say pro-Russian elements, which finally evaporated after 2014. So in a general way, Russia after 2014 or with 2014 lost Ukraine in many manners. And Zelensky government later on tried to even create closer relation with the strategic West. And finally, as we've seen, the Russian leadership decided to make Blitzkrieg, really short war attempt in February of last year in order to make a coup d'etat, or in order to just conquer Ukraine in a really fast way, toppling the government, even killing Zelensky, and creating a pro-Russian government, which would lead or made the rest of Ukraine as part of the stable part of the Russian sphere of influence. However, what we can see that this kind of endeavor failed, and this short war ended in a really long trench war in eastern Ukraine. So the Russian endeavors to topple the government were unsuccessful. Later on, Russia tried to capture Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, which was unsuccessful. Finally, Russia decided to rather focus on the eastern territories and liberate Luhansk and Donetsk, and later on other districts, which were in autumn 2022 become, after referendum, illegal referendum, they will become part of Russia. So to create a kind of greater Russian zone of influence within Ukraine. And what we can see that this kind of Russian operation, these kind of endeavors are again unsuccessful, as Russia, despite conquering some part of Ukraine, during the last years lost some of these conquests, like in the Kharkov district and also in Kherson. And other Russian operations, especially in the region of Bakhmut, were again unsuccessful, and the Ukrainians, with the help of the strategic West, the United States, and the majority of the European Union countries, could balance and could stop the Russian operations. And nowadays there is a big debate, or we will see what will happen, but there is a high probability for a new Ukrainian operation or offensive against the Russian lines, and if it is successful, probably they will regain again seizable part of the previously Russian conquered territories of Ukraine. And we will see when this war will end, but probably, and this is, let's say, the academic community's view from Hungary, that this war will last long, so at least a couple of years for the future. And it's also important to see that that we see from Hungary, that the Russian leadership is still not ready to make a general mobilization, which means that even if in theory Russia has the great power of man-force to send to Ukraine, due to several reasons the Russian leadership doesn't want to use that. On the other hand, in the available tools employed in or deployed in eastern Ukraine, it's not enough to defeat today conditions the Ukrainian army. So that's why we got bloody war, trench war in the eastern Ukrainian territories. And until there is no dramatic change in the Russian policy, there will be no real change in the field. So we will see what will happen. So we have lots of questions, but the Russian army wasn't at the preliminary stage, wasn't prepared to have this lasting resource-consuming war in Ukraine. That's why, for example, if you look at the number of tanks, Russia lost a lot. If you look at the numbers of daily bombardments, we can see a decline. So the Russians are not able to really continue the first stages of offensive that we could see during the first weeks or in so today they have more limited capabilities, while the Ukrainians are getting more from the European Union and especially the United States. So there is a kind of balance in the front compared to the previous years. The Ukrainians are much more better situation than they were 1 year before. We will see what will happen in the future, but at least we could see that the Russian army lost its previous prestige in many terms, and of course the majority of its, let's say, more modern weaponry like tanks and so on. So they are in a really big trouble. So this is in a nutshell what we can say about the war in Ukraine, and after that I will rather address this situation from the Hungarian foreign policy, because Hungary is a really interesting case study in terms of European Union politics, because let's say the ultimate majority of the European Union member states are following the same line, like condemning the Russian invasion, accepting without problem the sanctions. Even there are countries, Poland, the Baltics, who are seeking for more or stronger sanctions or harsher sanctions against Russia. And there was another, let's say, common point of view within a NATO, again in the strategic West, to welcome Sweden and Finland's accession to the NATO. Meanwhile, there is only one country in this EU-NATO membership which is rather hindering this kind of cooperation, anti-Russian cooperation, and this is Hungary. So from this point of view, Hungary is a really interesting case study. Why an established EU member is against the harsher EU sanctions in a given way, in a limited way, let's say. And it's a really good question here in Hungary. So we have several opinions, or we have different diverging opinions concerning the Hungarian government or Hungarian foreign policy incentives. But at least we can see that the Hungarian foreign policy, or the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Hungarian Prime Minister, is rather following the previous Hungarian foreign policy of balancing between the big blocs. So as Hungary was previously, in a given way, in several occasions, representing and defending the, let's say, Eastern interest, this policy was continued, or is still on the table today as well. So there is no change, and the big question is why are the incentives behind this kind of non-change or no difference foreign policy? Probably is because that the Hungarian foreign policy makers still believe that, or they have this strategic position that if we deteriorate too much the Russian relations, it will rather harm the Hungarian economic relations. And Hungary will be rather in a better position after the war, when the war is over, in a couple of years later, in order to re-establish or in order to gain concession in Russia. So probably this is the rather economic-driven incentives behind the Hungarian foreign policy commitment to not to destroy or not to harm too much the Russian economic and political relations. That's why there is a kind of dubious behavior in the Hungarian decision-making in this respect, which means that the Hungarian Hungarian Foreign Minister always accepts the sanctions of the European Union. We join that. In a given way, if there is some kind of option to somehow protect some marginal Russian interests, but can be, let's say, advertised towards Russia, they're rather ready to act. Probably the most important case was, just to highlight this behavior, that when last year the European Union wanted to sanction the Russian Church, Orthodox Church Patriarch Kirill, and the Hungarian government hindered this endeavor, arguing that we and the European Union shouldn't sanction church leaders or religious leaders because of this war. So it was a really nice example to defend in a limited manner the Russian interest, but without causing real damage to the European Union sanction policy towards Russia. And we can see other examples, like the Hungarian foreign policy, of course, condemned the aggression, saying that the Ukrainian territory integrity is important, but it's usually do not criticize Russia. Especially in the Hungarian domestic context, it's relatively, if you look at the Hungarian news, it's not that easy to figure out that Russia was the aggressor against Ukraine. And instead of blaming Russia, the Hungarian foreign policy is rather ready to talk about peace, the importance of peace, which, of course, welcomed by everyone. But this is, let's say, the cornerstone or the most important feature of the Hungarian foreign policy towards Ukraine and Russia. That, okay, we see that there is a war, but we rather need a ceasefire. We rather need a peace. However, this kind of peace is not well formulated, of course, in the Hungarian narrative. And if today we say that there is a ceasefire between Ukraine and the Russians, it will rather unacceptable towards the Ukrainian side, because the Ukrainian society is ready to fight. It's their decision. Of course, they get the Western support, which is ultimately important. But if the Ukrainians are ready to fight and they are advancing, or they will be probably advancing in the upcoming months against the Russians, you cannot say that there will be need a ceasefire. So you cannot convince them. On the other hand, if there is a ceasefire, Russia will gain more time to regain its power and who knows when to relaunch the offensive. So that's why the Ukrainian point is that we shall regain the former territories and after conclude a treaty and get strong guarantees from the West, from the East, from Russia, in order to not relaunch this war. So in this term, or in this context, talking about peace, it's rather kind of dubious. On the other hand, which is really important, that during the last year, when the war started, Hungary was in a domestic political campaign, election campaign, as there was parliamentary elections in Hungary in early April last year. And during this electoral campaign, this Russian war, or war in Ukraine, shock appeared and started to dominate, of course, the local narrative. And the Hungarian population had this feeling that, okay, we don't want to enter any kind of war with Russians. We don't need this war. We don't like Ukrainians. It's not our issue. And the Hungarian government was using this kind of sentiment, arguing that, okay, we need peace and we will not condemn Russia because we need them in a given way, of course. And more surprisingly, this kind of narrative stemming from, in a given way, from domestic political reasons is still on the table, and the very large part of the Hungarian population is welcoming that, which is, compared to the Western or Polish society, is relatively uncommon, or at least interesting. On the other hand, just in order to not harm too much the Russian relations, Hungarian government or the Hungarian parliament accepted a law not to send lethal weapon to Ukraine, and also not to allow other NATO countries to send lethal weapon or lethal tools to Ukraine via Hungarian territory. So Hungary sent lots of humanitarian aids to Ukraine, and it also opened its border to the Ukrainian refugees. So some 1 million Ukrainian just came to Hungary, and later of ultimate majority of them left the country to Poland, Germany, and so on. But Hungary demonstrated a much more welcoming border policy compared to, for example, Syrian refugees, what we could see in 2015, 2016. So from this respect, the Hungarian situation, Hungarian foreign policy had this balancing acts. However, the prestige and the common views about the Hungarian foreign policy is in the European Union is rather pro-Russian. And still there is nothing that can be changed. And also in a given way, it was related to the Finnish and Swedish NATO accession, because Hungary also said, in line with Turkey, that it's not ready to sign or to ratify these countries' accession to the organization. But the big difference is, compared to Turkey, that we do not have any kind of real claims towards Swedish and Finnish. So why Turkey was arguing that especially Sweden shall send back some terrorists, re-establish armed weapon cooperation, or just to accept more anti-terrorist legislation against the PKK and so on. So there were acceptable requirements or demands from the Turkish side. The Hungarian government didn't say anything. And finally, it's also interesting that when Turkey decided that Finland can join the NATO, so the Turkish parliament will ratify, the Hungarian parliament also, again, in a really fast way, ratified just before Turkey this accession treaty. And concerning the Swedish issue, still there is no other news from the Hungarian government. The Hungarian government spokesperson declared 2 weeks ago that the Swedish shall figure out how they can convince the Hungarian parliament to ratify their accession to the NATO, which is good luck from one point of view, but compared to the Turkish issue or Turkish requirements, it's totally difficult to understand how it works like this. So to conclude, these are the main pillars of the Hungarian foreign policy. And just to mention another important issue, the minority one, because 2014, the new Ukrainian government, which had become anti-Russia, especially after losing Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine, having a war, started to accept more and more anti-minority legislation. It was already during the 90s and 2000s an issue, because the Ukrainian state was a nationalizing state, which means that it was against the Russian language, the Russian minority in a given way. And of course, by accepting more nationalist pro-Ukrainian language or minority laws, it will rather curtail or cut back the rights of the other minority groups, Romanians, Polish people, and Hungarians as well. And after 2014, and again, a new pattern in Central Europe, that Romania and Poland, which were until that rather criticizing Ukraine because of the situation of the Polish or especially the Romanian minorities, they decided that in the shadow of the Russian threat in the east, they will not open this chapter. However, the Hungarian government started to behave contrary, and the minority issue, especially accepting several kind of less pro-minority language legislation and education legislation, the Hungarian government started to hamper, and of course in a limited way, the NATO-Ukrainian cooperation and the Ukrainians' prospect to cooperation with the European Union and so on. And after when the war started, this minority issue still is an integral part of the Ukrainian-Hungarian foreign policy agenda. So there is no real difference. And this is really interesting that even if the other countries totally neglects today this issue, Hungary still, despite this war, is rather using this Hungary Humanity card in order to make the West-Ukrainian cooperation more difficult, just in order to blackmail the Ukrainian state to change this legislation. And finally, I would like just to mention another personal view about the geopolitical consequences of this war towards Hungary and the Central European region. So what we can see, and I was arguing that we have this multipolar world, rising regional powers, not great powers, but regional powers like Russia. And this war demonstrated that Russia is not that threatening or not that strong to beat Ukraine or, let's say, the collective West, which means that the relative independence and relative strength, the relative strength of the Central European countries started to increase compared to Russia. And during the history, we had similar times, and when the Russians, or let's say our eastern neighbors, like the Mongol Empire, Golden Horde, and so on, they were relatively weak. There were also more options for Central European states like Poland, Bohemia, and even the Kingdom of Hungary to have a greater room for maneuver. So this is what started to happen. And more importantly, or more technically, Poland started to become the engine of this strengthening Central Europe. And if you look at the history, probably and the old, maps of early modern age of Europe, probably you remember to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, or Rzeczpospolita, which was a huge state. Probably it was the biggest state in the European continent for a long time, having more than 1.5 million kilometers. Let's say the ultimate part of the Baltics, even Estonia, Lithuania, of course, Estonia, Latvia, today, some part of today Poland, western part of Ukraine, but even Kiev, the totality of Belarus, and even some part of eastern Russia. It's a relatively huge state. And right now, due to this common perception and the threat coming from the east, the Baltic states and Poland, since 2014, have the same foreign policy, just to anyway hinder the Russian influence, strengthen their military, and having good relation, especially with the United States, and becoming some kind of engine of the political, not just economic, but political engine of the European Union as well. This is Poland, which is representing this agenda, which is, comparatively a bigger payer to Hungary, because it has around 40 million population. And it got, even before the war, several millions Ukrainian guest workers. But when the war started, or after the war started, other millions of Ukrainians settled in Poland. And for Ukrainians to learn Polish languages relatively easy. So it's like Turkish and Azeri, so they can understand each other relatively easy. And they are accepted by the society, especially after the war, because the Polish society and the Polish political elite demonstrated really welcoming and supporting behavior towards the Ukrainian cause, and still is on the capable. So what we can see that there is a new brotherhood between Ukrainians and Poland, and Poland is probably the strongest and loudest supporter of Zelensky and the Ukrainian government and Ukraine itself within the European Union. So it's ultimately sure that, and it happens every day, that Ukrainian state and the remnants of the Ukrainian state and Poland, they're converging, they're creating, I wouldn't say that a new Commonwealth, but strong cooperation, which can, with the other smaller states, make this region more powerful. And due to the help or support from the West, we have in the European continent the most developed and the most, let's say, experienced army in Ukraine. And in parallel, Poland also launched a really huge military modernization program. So it will make, during the upcoming 10 years, one of the most well-equipped and the strongest army in the European continent, but especially in Central Europe, it's not a question. So this is what we can see right now. And this kind of Ukrainian Polish cooperation is also changing the rest of Central Europe, as the Hungarian foreign policy had this kind of regional view of creating the Visegrad for cooperation, which is a kind of advocacy group constituted of Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia within the European Union. So it was formed after the collapse of the Soviet Union in order to defend themselves from the Soviet Union or the rest of the Soviet Union. But as these countries entered in the EU, this group is rather used as a kind of small EU or advocacy group within the European Union. We have other advocacy groups like Nordic countries and so on, who are rather representing together their interests, and they put several issues on the EU agenda together. So this is the same level of the Visegrad 4. However, the war in Ukraine and the Hungarian kind of pro-Russian behavior finally made this Visegrad 4 cooperation futile, and Polish has a rather ultimately anti-Russia stance. Why Slovakia and the Czech Republic, they are also following the great Western lines, so they are sending weapons to Ukraine and so on, they're condemning Russia and so on, even if they have still a little bit better relation with Russia. And Hungary has the most pro-Russian relation, and the perceptions is that Hungary is totally kind of supporter of Russia, even if in terms Hungary accept and do or does what the European Union wants in 99% or 95%. But despite having this 1 percentage point or 5 percentage point discrepancy, the perception of Hungary is rather negative. But this is what we can see, that Hungary probably will continue its balancing act, and let's say the successfulness or the success of this balancing will highly depend on how the war is finished, when it is finished, what are the outcomes. It will be Russia totally isolated from the West for the upcoming decades and becoming the part of China's sphere of influence or not. And the other question, that this Polish-Ukrainian convergence will be a lasting issue or not, and if it's last, what will be the end? And there will be a greater cooperation, there will be some kind of new commonwealth or not. So, and the Ukrainian-Polish allies will be ready to act together in order to strengthen their country's international position together in the future, and especially when the war is over. So we have lots of questions in the table, and the Hungarian foreign policy's behavior is really under question, but why it doesn't follow the Western lines in its totality. But still, it's a really interesting example how to make balancing acts in this bloc war today. So here I would like to finish my presentation, and I would like to give the speech back to you. And if you have any kind of questions, I'm ready to discuss and respond them.
Dr. Zoltan Egeresi, it was really detailed historical background of your country, your foreign relations policies in relation to the ongoing war in the region and in the neighboring regions. It was really conspicuous and inspiring, I'm sure, that for my students, dear participants, and for myself as well. But I have some, questions in relation to your presentation. But before that, I would like to give the word to Head of International Relations Office, the Associate Professor Dr. Yusuf Çınar, and then I will convey some questions of my students. At last, that will be my turn. Professor Çınar, please ask whatever you want, because it was really long presentation, really informative and knowledgeable. To be honest, by myself, I had the chance of getting lots of knowledge and information about Hungary and Hungarian culture, history. Thank you.
I would like to thank Zoltan Egeresi. Thank you very much. First of all, if we look at political history of European Union. Yes, maybe firstly we should focus on World War II. Especially, you can remember that Chamberlain's sliding policy, especially like today, in my opinion. Especially my first question relating the Putin and European Union relation, especially Merkel and Putin relation. You know, especially when Georgia and Russia war, after European Union only watched this game. And after Crimea annexation, still European Union watching the game. And today, Ukraine started war, and European Union, if you look at this game, according to your perspective, European Union and Russia in the future can make some collaboration, especially gas market and other foreign policy issues. What do you think about it? Especially secondly, you know, Munich Security Conference is very important. Especially Putin declared that NATO is very dangerous for Russia security perspective. But now NATO needs Ukraine. What do you think about it? Especially NATO can take measures, especially maybe can in the future NATO cannot accept NATO Ukraine because maybe can say Russia concerns are right, so we can conduct our foreign policy without Ukraine, can say. But now, especially United States and European Union countries mostly supporting this process. What do you think about it, especially? Yes, my question is that.
Okay, thank you very much. So I get two questions. So concerning this European Union policy towards Russia during the last decades, especially Merkel, yeah, I mean, retrospective, it's much easier to, let's say, evaluate the European Union or several European Union member states' foreign policy. But I would say that European Union or Merkel was rather ready to neglect this kind of threats stemming from Russia in order to maintain or gain economic gains, especially for Germany. As the European, I mean, that part of the world, or in case of Germany, the German economic success was based on export and especially the German industry's high reliance of cheap energy. So it was in a given way the responsibility of Merkel that, for example, after 2014, when the United States and the Ukrainians themselves, because they were attacked, but the United States decided or declared or recognized that Russia is a kind of new kind of challenger, redrawing country borders, and it's a threat towards the stability of the rest of Europe. While the European Union member states, they were ready to somehow neglect or sideline this conflict, especially because in Eastern Ukraine, it remained, let's say, regional. And in case of Crimea, there was no real war. I mean, military clashes. So in the elites in France and especially Germany, in Austria, but also in Hungary, were ready to close their eyes and, of course, accepting some kind of limited sanctions when the Malaysian Airlines flight was down by the separatist forces in Eastern Ukraine, and lots of, especially Dutch citizens died. So after this military conflict, the European Union accepted some kind of limited sanctions. They were not ready to really cancel the economic relations with Russia. And it was really demonstrated that the new gas pipeline, Nord Stream 2, was also on the process of, or remained on the table in order to reach, and finally it was cancelled last year. But Merkel was rather supportive, and the Russian supply to European, Central European countries, gas markets, for example, in the case of Hungarian gas market, the gas, some 90% of the gas come from Russia. And this was the case for Slovakia or Czech Republic as well. So this reliance made these countries more competitive, and more importantly, kind of cheaper gas prices for the population, which made the people, the governments more popular, especially in Hungary, because the Hungarian government had this kind of really, let's say, cheap gas prices policy since the mid 2010s. So in order to gain economic interest, they were rather tending not to open this question with Russia. The Polish had totally different behavior, and they started to strategically diminish the Russian gas supply, and somehow so they opened LNG terminals with American support in order to get any kind of, especially American LNG. So they were, like, say, accepting that Russia is turning to the, let's say, old-fashioned Tsarist empire expansionist policy, which sometimes in the past was unsuccessful when other countries beat the empire, but sooner or later the empire strikes back. And this is what we can see. The others were rather against, I mean, especially Germans and the Hungarian elite were not ready to accept this kind of reality. And for the rest of Europe, this February attack finally showed that there is no way to really act or cooperate with Russia. And more importantly, especially considering the future expectations, of course, I do not see the future, unfortunately, but there are some issues which shall be put into consideration if we would like to forecast something. So first of all, concerning the energy deal, energy cooperation between European Union member states and Russia, Russia started to decrease the gas amount sold to European markets much before the war in February. So the gas volume coming from Russia was already much smaller in late 2021 than previously. And it was the Russian decision to manipulate the Western European and Central European gas markets in order to making some kind of pressure to the governments, because the gas prices started to rocket. And this kind of gas issue was used by a kind of blackmailing card by the Russian side. And it's really interesting in the Hungarian context or the Hungarian media, we are officially blaming the European Union sanctions against Russia that harming the gas consumption and gas prices, making the gas prices much more expensive. But in reality, it was Russia which made the gas prices so high. So, and after that, in several cases like Bulgaria and Poland, Russia just cut this kind of gas supply, even despite having, and it's also really important, despite having normal agreements. So more importantly for the future, Russia in economic terms or as a player terms, it's totally untrustable from the European point of view. There is no open war between the European Union member states and Russia, but in economic terms, it's really difficult to make any kind of agreements with an untrustable partner. And lots of, not every, of course, but lots of Western companies left Russia and still they are ready to leave Russia, but the Russian state is punishing them. So right now we can see a kind of economic divergence between the states and various economic actors, and it will be really difficult to relaunch these relations. And in parallel, we have this war in Ukraine. It can be ended. And probably it will be rather linked to the fate of Putin. So when Putin's rule is over, we don't know when, we don't know why. So some is arguing that he is ill, some is arguing that there will be some kind of coup d'etat in an inner circle. We don't know. But probably this war and this kind of situation and the self-imposed isolation with the West will continue until the, I don't know, death or until the resignation of Putin, which we don't know when will happen. And even if we get a new Russian state and leadership, it's still a huge question what kind of new leadership we will have. There will be another authoritarian leader, a nationalist one, which is rather probable, or there will be Russia with chaos, let's say kind of having some kind of civil war, and the dissolving Russian Empire, which will be even worse for the European Union, but having great economic instability will make any kind of cooperation even more difficult. So from this respect, I'm not that optimistic concerning future European Union and Russian relations, because there is no real economic and political trust between the two actors. And from this respect, Turkey, for example, is a much better position. So because there are no needs for EU sanctions to be accepted, as Turkey not part of the EU, and Turkey has become one of the most important, let's say, sanction evasion partner for Russia concerning the Western sanctions. So that's why Turkey is in a really valuable position, even if the Turkish-Russian relations are full with difficulties and debates and intertwining geopolitical sphere of influence and issues. Is correct, but still there is much more opportunity for Turkey to continue its economic cooperation with Russia. If I'm right, today there is kind of ceremony at Akkuyu, which is a really good step towards that. But for example, after the war, I mean, the February intervention, the Finnish government has just stopped or just cancelled the project of building a new nuclear power plant by a Russian Rosatom company. And this is the issue in Hungary. The Hungarian government doesn't want to cancel the new nuclear power plant project by Rosatom, which was concluded in couple of years ago, but the European Union would like to somehow, let's say, kill this partnership. So in the case right now, there is a rising anti-Russian sentiment, a geopolitical competition, and Hungary would like to be in the position of room of maneuver as Turkey is, but we cannot. And even if we would rather ready to cooperate with Russia, we don't have enough room for maneuver, because it's really important to emphasize that as lots of European Union member states from Central Europe started to send their weapons, let's say older generation weapons, to Ukraine, the United States decided, and also in given by Germany, to replace these old weaponry with the new ones. And also to send military economic packages, lots of money to these countries, except Hungary. So Hungary is already punished because of this balancing policy. And Turkey, which has other issues with the United States, for example, is not still criticized in a great way because of its behavior in the war. So it's big differences, but the rest of the European Union, I don't think that they will be really able to rebuild the relations with Russia in the upcoming years, as still Putin will stay at power. The war probably in a limited way, but will continue. And despite Hungarian endeavors to mend fences, to seek ceasefire or peace treaty, whatever, even Turkey was more successful in at least the first weeks of the war, gathering peace conferences, or at least the two sides gathered in Antalya and Istanbul, but without meaningful results. So for the European Union states, these kind of prospects are even smaller to really reach this peace stage. So the war will remain with us for the upcoming years, and I don't think that the European Union economic relations, political relations will be re-established in the upcoming 5-10 years with Russia. After that, who knows? But it is strategic and historical, let's say, breaking point in this Russian-European relations. This is my answer.
Another informative presentation while giving answers to the questions of Professor Çınar. Dear students, dear participants, do you have any question?
Yeah, I have questions, sir.
Mr. Speaker, or else I have a written question from my student, Furkan. But before that, please go ahead, Habib, ask your question, please.
First of all, thank you for your informative speech, sir. So my question is about the relationship of Ukraine and Russia. You know, like about the America and England, they like each other, they support each other when there is a problem, especially same for Turkey, like Middle Asia countries who have the same backgrounds. Also, I guess like Russia and Ukraine have the same background. So why they don't love each other? Why this war broke out? Yeah, tell me about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this question. Yeah, it's a really complex issue because even if Russian and the Ukrainian language are really similar, and they have almost the same religion, so they have different churches, but they are Orthodox. So from this point of view, it could be really interesting why they are quarreling that much. But yeah, this division, or I mean, this conflict stems from geopolitical and Russian perceptions, geopolitical reasons and Russian political perceptions, and of course the rising nationalism. So during the, as I mentioned, that Russia under Putin started to regain its previous strengths in a limited manner, of course. So we didn't get back the Soviet Union, the superpower position. But during the 2000s, the Russian economy started to get stronger due to the revenues of gas and oil trade, especially with the European Union states, which opened the way towards a modernization, a limited modernization of the Russian army. We expected a more stronger Russian army, but we could see that this kind of modernization was a corrupt way to steal money. But we, at least probably the Russian elite, believed that they have a much stronger army and much more bigger capacities. They were miscalculated the situation, but at least some kind of reforms were started. On the other hand, during the late 2000s, there was some kind of positive economic developments for the rest of the society, for the middle class and so on. And this kind of positive economic growth, or let's say population wealth enriching, somehow started to be hindered or to be stopped in the early 2000s due to the global financial crisis and other reasons. And rising anti-Putin sentiment put everything under question. But after 2012 elections, when the government in practice made more authoritarian terms, of course, you can always argue whether the Russian state after the collapse of the Soviet Union were democratic or not. It always had autocratic tendencies. But after 2012, there is a rising authoritarian tendency in Russia, which finally led to the annihilation of really anti-Putin opposition, some part of the ultimate majority of the anti-Putin civil society, and so on. Even before the war, the remnants of the anti-Putin media outlets were cancelled. They were closed in the country. So it was a long process. having several political debates between the EU and the West and Russia, but no one could really challenge this authoritarian term. However, for this authoritarian term and economic challenges, the Russian state put on the table rising Russian nationalism. And as I mentioned, so it's also in the background in this process, and the rising Russian economic capabilities and military capabilities convinced the Putin that the former Soviet Union or the rest of it, the Russian sphere of influence in the near abroad, especially when there is larger Russian population, shall be again put in the kind of Russian dominance. And in the case of Belarusia, it happens with great success, as Lukashenko is a good, I wouldn't say that friend of Putin, but a good partner or subject of Putin, especially when probably you remember there were elections in 2012 in Belarus, and Lukashenko manipulated the outcomes. There were kind of riots and protests against him, and the Russians helped him to keep his power. And since then, even if before Belarus was kind of balancing between the West and Russia, they totally, after that, Lukashenko position, room for maneuver vis-a-vis Russia was totally diminished, and there is no option to have an independent foreign policy. And Belarus, the only state from the Rzeczpospolita, old Rzeczpospolita, is a kind of Russian subject right now. And Putin would like to have something similar in Ukraine in order to maintain its position of challenger vis-a-vis the West, and also defend itself from other rising powers like China or India, even if they are cooperating right now. However, the case of Ukraine, the society was different. They had, especially in the western part of the country, more anti-Russia and more Ukrainian nationalist sentiments. And more importantly, because this kind of sentiments can be used, manipulated anytime, but in the political level, this was rather a more democratic state and ultimately not dictatorship or authoritarian states compared to Belarus. Ukraine is rather a weak state still today, but at least there were government changes, competing elites compared to Belarus or Russia. And this kind of behavior opened the way to reformulate its relation with Russia. And there were this, as I already mentioned, really strong incentives and decision from at least some part of the Ukrainian elite to join the EU, join the NATO, do that, strengthen its Western relations, somehow counterbalance or diminish the Russian influence and so on. And this kind of policy ended in 2014 when Russia decided to save at least some part of the Ukrainian territories and keep its troops and the rebels officially in eastern Ukraine, which of course made the Ukrainian accession to the NATO impossible. And this kind of policy was more strengthened during the last years, and no one knows what was in Putin's mind when he finally gave the order to attack Ukraine last February. But probably he had this kind of feelings that, yeah, he would like to continue this kind of re-imperialist empire rebuilding process by having a new satellite state in form of the new Ukrainian government after toppling Zelensky and so on. So probably this was the plan, but it, from the Russian point of view, it went wrong. And also, which is really interesting, that after 2014, after Crimea, but especially after the events following Crimea, when in other cities like Odessa, Kharkiv, and Donetsk, Luhansk, there were attempts to make a separatist state, and these kind of attempts were successful just only in the eastern Ukraine. In Odessa, there were some bloodshed, so the Ukrainian majority just, or the law enforcement forces, more importantly, or more exactly, they killed the Russian rioters. And similar stuff happened other cities as well. So the Russian state decided to use this kind of anti-Russia Russian acts in Ukraine in order to boost the Russian nationalism and get support from the society. And if everyone is arguing or thinking about saving the Russian nation, economic performance and real political situation in the country is not under scrutiny. If you look at the parlance of the Russian propaganda outlets, the Russian television, news sites, and so on, the Ukrainians as Nazis, this kind of identification started in 2014. So before that, in practice, there were no articles about that, really small numbers, one criticizing the Ukrainians and they are, I don't know, Nazis. But after that, they got a tremendous amount of news, and still this is the official narrative that this is not a war but a special operation in order to liberate and defend our brothers and Russian brothers and sisters against the Ukrainian Nazis. So it's a kind of denazification campaign from the official Russian population narratives, and a big part of the population accept that. So it's from in a really threatening way, it's a success of propaganda, how to fuel anti-sentiment against an ethnic group. And it's really interesting that I have Russian friends, and even before the war, when we were talking about Ukrainians, they had this kind of arrogant perception that Ukrainians are poor idiots and people. Probably it had some kind of already existing perception before the war, before 2014, but this kind of perceptions were strengthened by the media. And that's why, even if they are friends and their language is close, they have really common culture, they could create a really ultimate hatred against each other by the Russian propaganda and acts. And of course, we had, during the last year, finally ended any kind of friendship concern for the upcoming decades between Russians and Ukrainians, because we had Bucha, we had several massacres in Ukraine, which was well propagated in Ukraine and the West itself. And more importantly, the Russian population in Ukraine was still against the Russian invasion. So this invasion made the Ukrainian nation. Not again, but it formed that. So after last February, there is no question that the Ukrainians are Ukrainians and they are against the Russians. So yeah, this kind of issue, anti-sentiments were created slowly, but they will remain on the agenda for the upcoming decades, it's 100% sure. I hope I could answer your question.
Yeah, it was great. Another long answer, and very detailed and inspiring for our students. By the way, we have nearly 10 minutes to complete this session. Is there any question from among the participants, or else I will try to read 2 questions from our students? Is there any question among the participants? Yes, please. Who wants to ask?
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I want to say we can blame Russia because killing people is a crime. And I wonder why when a war breaks out in one country, other neighboring countries just watch. I think leaders of the world should come together for peace, not just money and power. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanch. So there was a question in. So what was the question? Sorry, I didn't get the point.
Yes, I said why when a war breaks out in one country, other neighboring countries just watch.
Okay, so I mean, in case of this Ukrainian war, I would say that the other neighboring countries are not just watching. So from the Russian side, Belarus is also supporting it by giving weapons, by letting its territory used by Russians for the attack. So they are involved. So it's, let's say, the bad side. While if we look at the European countries, they are sending weapons to Ukraine. So Ukraine is not alone, not at all. That's why it could resist to the Russian aggression. On the other hand, and this is the big issue of international relations, and you can argue that it's this Hobbesian word that Hobbes in the first half of the 17th century, as a British priest, in his famous book of Leviathan, was arguing that the human society can be ruled by an ultimate power, let's say Leviathan, which was a monster from the Bible. And by having this ultimate power, it can have the monopoly of using weapons, using force, and it could create a kind of stable society and peaceful world, and peaceful society within a country. And this is about the well-functioning government. But the problem is that in the world level, we don't have a well-functioning world government. We have several states or group of states, and they are challenging each other. And from time to time, they can act, they can start a war. And this is what we can see. So there is no ultimate power, even or the United States, who will say that, okay, Russia, okay, Ukraine, just chill down, do not use weapons. And the big issue is that Russia is a weak power, at least a medium power, despite its huge gas reserves and territory, but the population is not that big, not small, but I mean, the economic performance of Russia is not that huge. I mean, Spain has a bigger one, especially nowadays, or Italy, and so on. So Russia is an important actor, of course, but it's not that superpower that it was. But the only issue is what Russia could maintain, it's the atomic bombs. It's still really important. It's cementing its power. And there is no other option to really attack Moscow or Russia, because it has atomic bomb and it will use it. So that's why it's very difficult. The West can conduct a proxy war against Russia, nothing more in Ukraine, because NATO don't want to open a nuclear war or start a nuclear war with Russia. Good news, Russia also doesn't want that, hopefully, but this is what we could see. And hopefully it will not change in the upcoming future. And that's all. So the only issue is that there will be a political change in Russia, and it will somehow handle this problem in the future. But so this is the issue. That's why it can be a war, and that's why the other countries in several cases will not be ready to enter this war, and still we have to wait for have a global Leviathan. I hope that you get the question, the answer.
Thank you, Doctor. There are two questions written by the participants, by our students. I think there are general questions, but I just kindly want you to just, answer if possible within few sentences, but maybe it will take still time. I wonder, what is the latest situation about Ukrainian refugees in Hungary right now? For example, what disadvantages did their coming led up to Hungary cause in context of economy and sociology? The other one is about just like a complot theory. What I want to say is that there's a constant conflict between America and Russia. I think Russia is provoking its religious brother and neighbor, Ukraine. Could this be America's strategic game to count Russia and Ukraine and it on a solution? Or are we seeing a third world war now?
Okay, concerning the refugee issue, so that's not a burden, not a problem. As mentioned, that more than 1 million Ukrainian fled to Hungary, but just around 40,000-50,000 remain in the country. So a country of 10 million is not a big problem, and people, probably the majority of people who remained in the country, their family members were already living in Hungary, so it's rather family reunification. On the other hand, the majority of them probably is Hungarian citizen, so they're Hungarian from Zakarpatska region, which means their integration is no problem. They know the language, they know the culture, we like them. We even don't know they are Ukrainian citizens, or they even some of them don't speak Ukrainian, so it's not an issue. It's not an economic burden. They, on the other hand, they got every kind of support from the Hungarian state. I know lots of them bought apartment in Hungary, so it's like in Turkey. So not a big issue, not a problem. No economic problem for that. And in just to mention, in Central Europe, every country needs huge manforce or workforce. So even in Poland, which hosts more than 1 million Ukrainians, refugees, it was rather easy to find a job. So it's not a big issue. Concerning the other question, there is no third world war. It's kind of a proxy war between Russia and the West in Ukraine, but it's far to be a third world war. And of course, America is containing again the threatening and challenging Russia. So this is something which we could see during the Cold War, especially after the Truman Doctrine was declared or announced. And it's a relatively easy way and cheap way for Americans just to parallelly to kill the Russian army, because they have huge losses due to their wrong decisions and unpreparedness. But anyway, until today, we will see. I will emphasize the end of the war, but until today, it's the Ukrainian war. It's a huge loss for Russia. Finally, with this war, any kind of Russian dream to become a great power ended. Why? It's a relatively cheap way to get a stronger NATO, having Finland on the board, probably Sweden in the upcoming future, more integrated European Union, especially the Hungarian foreign policy changes, having a more integrated Ukraine to the West. I don't think that in the upcoming future there will be a NATO membership or EU membership. Until the end of the war, it's 100% sure. But still, it's 100% sure, on the other hand, that Ukrainian society, through the new refugee waves, through and commitment from Poland and Germany and so on, it's highly integrated to the European Union or the Western integration process. So from this respect, again, despite the preliminary plans of Putin to make Ukraine and the Ukrainians a subject state of the greater Russian empire, it's right today the opposite of this previous endeavor. And of course, the United States, as one of the hegemon or wannabe hegemon in world politics, is not against that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think that's enough for the time being, because Yusuf Hoca, Professor Yusuf Çınar, had to leave because he's supposed to participate in this Senate meeting for the weekly organized meeting. And I think it will be more than 1 hour and 45 minutes, and you must be tired. We are really grateful for this very detailed historical presentation. Personally, I got much information on Hungary and Hungarian cultural background and its international relations and its reaction to these devastating and devastating bloody conflict, which paves the way for poverty and bad and negative outcomes, results for world and for the neighboring countries region. Thank you very much, Dr. Zoltan Egeresi. Would you like to add something else, or?
I would like to thank again this opportunity, and I'm really happy that you could get some insights about the Hungarian foreign policy and the situation here in Central Europe. And you are welcome to Hungary. So if you come to
yeah,
Budapest,
I am also the Erasmus coordinator of the department, the institutional coordinator and the departmental coordinator of Department of English. We have a bilateral agreement with Hungarian University, Janos Kodolanyi. So I am planning to come in future, but I don't know when. Maybe next time. This time for Slovakia. So I can't wait. I can't wait, and hope to talk with you again. What is going on? And I hope that next time maybe we will talk about much more positive outcomes of the international policies of Europe and the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's be optimistic.
We are honored to see you here. Have a good day. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.